2 days later, Michael was packing for a work trip. Before leaving, he handed Jumoke an envelope. "Here is 30k, he said. "Use it for anything you need while I'm gone. I'll be back by the weekend." Jumoke's eyes widened. "Thank you, sir. This means so much to me." Michael nodded and left. The moment he was gone, Chichi's mood darkened. She entered the room eyeing the envelope in Jumoke's hand. "Jumoke," she said with a smile, "let me have that money. We need it for cooking since Michael didn't leave anything else." Jumoke hesitated. But, he said it is for me, in case I need something. Chichi's expression changed immediately. "Are you talking back to me?" she snapped. Without waiting, she slapped Jumoke hard. I am sorry, ma," Jumoke stammered. Chichi snatched the money. "Know your place in my house. Don't ever question me again," she said. Jumoke nodded and hurried to her room, tears streaming down her eyes. In the afternoon that day, Chichi called her best friend Lolade. "Lolade, you won't believe what happened in my house," Chichi began. "Michael wants to act like a father to Jumoke and her child. He's spending on her like she's family." "What?" Lolade gasped. "You can't allow that. That girl is trying to take over your home," Lolade said. "Don't worry," Chichi replied. "I will make her life miserable until she leaves." "Good," Lolade encouraged. "And don't let her get close to Michael. These girls can be dangerous," Lolade advised her best friend Chichi. "She won't get the chance," Chichi said coldly. That night, Jumoke was in her room, hungry and desperate. She knocked on Chichi's door. "Ma, please, I am hungry." "The kitchen is locked," she said. "There is no food left," Chichi replied coldly. "Can I get a little money to buy something?" Jumoke asked cautiously. "Money?" Chichi's voice rose. "Do I look like your father? Don't ask me for anything. Now leave my sight," Chichi said. She slammed the door, leaving Jumoke standing there, tears in her eyes. At midnight, driven by hunger, Jumoke crept into the backyard and searched the neighbor's dustbin. She found a piece of bread. Ashamed but desperate, she took a bite, tears streaming down her eyes. "God, please help me. I don't deserve this," she murmured. Alone in the darkness, she ate, swallowing her pride along with the stale bread. 2 days later, Chichi looked at Jumoke with usual cold expression. "Jumoke, sweep the entire house. Don't miss a single spot. When you are done, wash all my clothes. Don't waste my time. I still have more for you to do." Jumoke nodded quietly, already feeling the ache in her body. She picked up the broom and started sweeping, her pace quickening under Chichi's stern glare. "Yes, ma," she said softly. Hours passed by as Jumoke scrubbed and washed. Her hand throbbed and her back ached, but she dare not stop. "Why are you so slow, Jumoke? At this rate, you'll be washing till midnight. You are a disgrace, pregnant and still useless," Chichi said angrily. Jumoke swallowed her tears and mumbled an apology. After hours of work, Jumoke sat down, hoping for a moment of rest, but Chichi's voice cut through her relief. "Oh, so now you think you can relax? Get up and scrub that kitchen floor," Chichi said. Her heart sank, but Jumoke got up and dragged her weary feet to the kitchen. "God, please, give me strength," Jumoke whispered. "Praying again? Do you think God listens to people like you? Just get on with it," Chichi said. The next morning, Jumoke was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she accidentally knocked over a bowl. It shattered on the floor. Her heart raced. Chichi stormed in, her face full of anger. "What did you do? Are you trying to destroy my house?" she said. I am sorry, ma. I didn't mean to," Jumoke said, stammering. "Be sorry for your useless self. That bowl was expensive. You were completely useless to me," Chichi said. Before Jumoke could respond, Chichi slapped her hard. Jumoke pressed her hand on her cheek as tears filled her eyes. "Clean that up right now and don't let me see a single piece left behind," Chichi said. Yes, ma, Jumoke whispered. Later that afternoon, Jumoke went outside to dump the broken pieces. Her spirit crushed. She placed her hand on her belly as her baby moved, whispering a silent prayer. As she walked back inside, Chichi's eyes followed her, filled with contempt. Look at her. You think you can just walk around like you belong here? I will show you your place, Chichi thought to herself. In the evening, Jumoke was hitting water when a sharp pain shot through her stomach. She held onto the counter, trying to steady herself. Chichi entered and immediately snapped at her. What are you standing there for? Before Jumoke could explain, Chichi grabbed the kettle and poured the hot water on her arm. Jumoke screamed, clutching her burnt arm. Ah, please, ma'am, I am sorry, Jumoke said. Sorry isn't good enough. Maybe next time you will learn to obey me. That night, Jumoke lay on her bed, her body aching, her heart heavy. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling her baby move gently. I am so sorry, my child. I promise to protect you. I will find a way out of this, she whispered. Her quiet sob filled the small room as she prayed for a better tomorrow. Immediately, Chichi barged into her room, looking at Jumoke up and down. In a mocking tone, she said, Jumoke, do you think you are finished? There is dust in the corners and laundry piling up. You know Michael will be back soon, and I expect this house to be spotless. Don't make me regret taking you in, she said. Yes, ma, I am on it, Jumoke said, grabbing the broom. Do you think I am running a hotel? Don't you dare think you are special because Michael felt sorry for you. If I was in charge, I would have thrown you out long time ago, Chichi said. Jumoke remained silent, the broom trembling in her hands. She knew better than to speak back at Chichi, especially with the baby inside her, growing weaker every day as she struggled to keep up with the endless choice. The next morning, Jumoke was up at dawn, scrubbing pots and preparing breakfast, hoping to avoid any troubles. She felt a familiar ache in her back, but continued walking, refusing to let Chichi see her weakness. Meanwhile, Chichi was watching Jumoke walk with a cruel smile. You look tired, Jumoke. It's almost like you are carrying the weight of the whole world. Oh, wait. It is just that baby of yours, isn't it? Chichi said. Yes, ma, Jumoke replied softly. If you can't even handle a simple basic choice, maybe you shouldn't be in my house at all, Chichi replied coldly. Later that afternoon, Jumoke sat on the floor polishing the wooden furnitures until her hands ached. She could feel her skin stinging from where Chichi had poured boiling water on her arms the previous night, but she kept scrubbing, ignoring the pain. Chichi looked over her shoulder with an unimpressed glare. Don't think you can slack off because you are injured. Get up and start cleaning the windows, and don't take all day about it. You wouldn't want me to give Michael a reason to regret helping you, would you? She said. No, ma, Jumoke said, holding back her tears, her voice barely audible. 2 days later, Michael finally returned, and Jumoke felt a wave of relief at the thought of seeing him again. But as she approached the door to greet him, Chichi intercepted her, putting a sweet, concerned expression. It is good to be home. Chichi, how have things been? Michael said, hugging Chichi, tired but smiling. My love, I have done my best to help poor Jumoke. She's so weak and fragile, but I've been making sure she's comfortable and has everything she needs. It's been hard, but I want to be a good sister to her, Chichi said, glancing at Jumoke with a sympathetic look. Thank you, Chichi. I appreciate everything you have done for her. I know it can't be easy with pregnancy, Michael said, smiling at Chichi. Jumoke felt a pang of disappointment as she watched Chichi skillfully lied. She longed to speak up, but she feared the consequences if Chichi overheard her. That evening, as Michael sat down for dinner, Jumoke served the food, keeping her head low to avoid meeting Chichi's eyes. Chichi continued her charade, smiling warmly at Jumoke. You won't believe how difficult it has been, Michael. Jumoke has been so helpless. I have had to practically do everything for her. I hope you are not upset that she isn't as useful around the house, Chichi said, placing a hand on Michael's arm. Of course not. I am grateful to you, Chi. I'll make sure Jumoke is taken care of so it doesn't burden you so much, Michael said, patting Chichi's hand. Thank you, sir, Jumoke whispered softly. The following morning, after Michael left for work, Chichi's kind demeanor disappeared. She summoned Jumoke to her room, her face dark and angry. Did you think Michael's presence would make me go easy on you? You have work to do, and I expect you to finish everything before he's home, Chichi said, glaring at Jumoke. Yes, ma, Jumoke replied. Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, you would have a real place to stay. Now, get out of my sight, Chichi sneered. Later in the afternoon, as Jumoke was washing the clothes, her arms ached, the pain from the burn worsened, her eyes blurred with tears, but she kept walking, knowing any hesitation would anger Chichi even more. Are you crying, Jumoke? Do you think anyone cares about your tears? You pathetic fool, Chichi said, watching from a doorway. No, ma, I am not crying, Jumoke stammered. That evening, when Michael returned home, Chichi was waiting with a fabricated story, spinning tales of how she had gone out of her way to make sure Jumoke was comfortable. You are a saint, Chichi. I don't know what I would have done without you. I am sure Jumoke appreciates everything you are doing for her, Michael said, nodding approvingly at Chichi. Jumoke remained silent, her heart heavy as she realized Michael had no idea of the torment she endured daily. Oh, I just hope she's grateful. It is not easy, but I know she's family, so I do what I can, Chichi said, glancing at Jumoke sympathetically. Thank you, ma, Jumoke said. Later in the night, Jumoke lay in bed, tears streaming down her face as she held her stomach, feeling her baby move within her. Her heart ached with the weight of her despair, and she whispered a quiet promise to her unborn child. I just need to do something. Mom, I hope you are seeing what your daughter is going through. I hope you get to know that I am innocent, Jumoke said through her tears. The next morning, Jumoke sat quietly in the living room, trying to enjoy a rerun on the TV. The house was really peaceful, so she took any chance to relax. Michael walked in, his face softened as he saw her. Jumoke, get ready. We are going out today. I'll buy you a few things, and then we'll have to visit your university. I need to speak with Amaka about that incident, he said, smiling. Thank you, sir. I didn't expect this. Let me get ready, Jumoke said, smiling. Jumoke left for her room, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. But Chichi, who had been eavesdropping, frowned. Her jealousy fled, and an idea formed in her mind. Immediately, she rushed to the backyard, picked up a piece of broken bottle, and pierced it on her leg until blood came out. Her scream shattered the silence. Michael! Me! Chichi screamed in pain. Michael, who had just came home, ran to the backyard. His eyes widened in shock when he saw Chichi bleeding. Chichi, what happened? Michael said, kneeling beside her. I slipped and fell on something sharp. It hurts me so much, Chichi said while she forced tears. As Michael carried Chichi to the car, Jumoke appeared, dressed and ready. Jumoke, I am sorry. I have to take Chichi to the hospital. Can we reschedule for tomorrow? Michael said apologetically. Jumoke understood him. It is okay, sir. Please take care of her. Michael nodded and left with Chichi. At the hospital, the doctor treated Chichi's wound and gave strict instruction. Mr. Michael, the wound is deep and she needs to rest and avoid putting pressure on the leg. Otherwise, it will take longer to heal, the doctor said. Michael stayed with Chichi until she was comfortable, then took her home. As they returned home, Jumoke greeted them quietly. Michael helped Chichi to settle on the couch and turned to Jumoke. Jumoke, I am really sorry about today. We will try again tomorrow, he said, looking regretful. It is fine, sir. Thank you for thinking of me, Jumoke said softly. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know it's been tough. Just hang in there, okay? he said. Jumoke managed a small smile, but inside her, she felt defeated. Chichi's manipulation had worked again. Alone in her room, Chichi smiled wickedly. Poor Jumoke. Do you really think Michael would help you? As long as I'm here, I will make sure he never puts you first. You will always remain beneath me. She laughed softly, her satisfaction evident. Meanwhile, Michael stood outside chatting on the phone with his younger brother. I can't wait to see you next week. It's been so long. He ended the call, but a notification on his phone caught his attention. It was a video message from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it. What he saw made his blood boil. Jumoke was rummaging through the dustbin in the compound, pulling out scraps of food with desperation in her eyes. Michael clenched his fists, anger rising. Storming inside, he shouted, "Jumoke! Jumoke!" Michael said furiously. Jumoke appeared, trembling at the sound of his voice. "Explain this to me. Why were you eating from the dustbin? What is going on?" Michael said, showing her the video. Jumoke froze, tears welling up as she glanced at Chichi. Unable to hold it in, she broke down in tears. "Chichi, did you stab her? Is this what's been happening behind my back?" Michael said, turning to Chichi angrily. Chichi was in shock. Jumoke sobbed harder, struggling to find the courage to tell the truth. She knew the consequences of exposing Chichi could make things even worse. Michael glared at Chichi, his frustration growing. He had just told Jumoke to wait for him in the car. As he confronted Chichi, Jumoke left, her face streaked with tears. "Chichi, I'm asking you one last time. Why was Jumoke digging through the trash for food? Are you treating her like a servant when I'm not here?" Michael said, his eyes blazing with anger. "Why would I know why she's eating from the trash? Am I her caretaker? I have my own life, Michael. I'm not here to babysit anyone you pick up from the streets," Chichi said, crossing her arms. "Stranger, she has been here for months. You should be treating her like she belongs here, not ignoring her," Michael said, raising his voice. "Oh, please, Michael, you are treating her like a princess. If she's so special to you, why don't you just marry her?" Chichi said. "Watch what you say, Chichi. I'm trying to understand what is happening. If you have been mistreating her, I will never forgive you," Michael said. "Mistreating her? I barely noticed she exists, Michael. Why should I care about someone who doesn't belong here?" Chichi said, smirking. "You think she's beneath you? You are supposed to have compassion. Have you forgotten what this is?" Michael said, shaking his head. "Oh, don't talk to me about compassion. You are the one acting like a fool, making sure she's comfortable while I'm stuck here, injured, and you don't even care about me. Maybe you are the one who is forgetting who should come first," Chichi yelled. "This isn't about loyalty, Chichi. It is about decency. If I found out you have been making Jumoke's life miserable, it will be over." Michael's voice trembled with anger. "Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead. Go be her hero. Maybe you will see who really cares about you," Chichi sneered. Without another word, Michael stormed outside, slamming the door behind him. Chichi followed, shouting after him, "Go to her! Everyone can see you are already having an affair with that girl. You have no respect for your wife," Chichi yelled. But Michael ignored her, walking to the car where Jumoke sat, wiping away her tears. He got in, started the car and drove off, leaving Chichi shouting behind them. Michael parked his car in front of a cozy restaurant. Jumoke sat behind him, nervous and unsure of what was happening. "Jumoke, I brought you here because I want you to feel safe enough to tell me the truth. What's been going on while I've been away?" he asked. Jumoke's eyes filled with small tears as she struggles to speak. The kindness in Michael's voice gave her the strength to speak up. "Sir, it's been terrible. I have tried to stay out of her way, but Chichi hates me. She barely lets me eat. She locked the kitchen and said I should starve because I'm nobody," Jumoke said, crying. Michael's heart sank as he listened, his hand gripping the edge of the table. "She makes me clean all day, and if I make a mistake, she calls me worthless. I've had to eat scraps because I was so hungry, sir. I am sorry, sir." Michael said, crying. Michael's heart sank as he listened, his hand gripping the edge of the table. She makes me clean all day, and if I make a mistake, she calls me worthless. I've had to eat scraps because I was so hungry, sir. I am sorry, sir." Jumoke said through her tears. Michael was stunned, his eyes brimming with tears as he processed her words. He couldn't believe his wife was capable of such cruelty. Jumoke, I am so sorry. I should have seen this sooner, but I promise you, I won't let her hurt you anymore, Michael said. Jumoke's tears continued, but a hint of relief appeared as Michael gently patted her hand. When they returned to the house, they were greeted by Chichi's loud voice from the pouch. Look at this. Can you all see? Jumoke is trying to steal my husband though. Hey, Chichi said, shouting, drawing attention. The neighbors gathered, shocked and curious. Jumoke turned red, feeling humiliated. Go inside, Jumoke. You don't deserve this, Michael said, looking at Jumoke. Jumoke nodded and rushed into the house. Michael faced Chichi, his expression hardened. What? Are you going to defend her now? Everyone, can you see? You don't care about me anymore. Maybe you should just kick me out and bring her in as your new wife. Chichi sneered. Michael's patience snapped for the first time. He raised his hand and slapped her across the face. You are a wicked woman, Chichi. I can't believe I married someone like you, Michael said. The neighbor gasped as Chichi staggered back, hands on her cheek, eyes widened in shock. Michael walked inside, leaving her speechless. Later that night, Chichi stormed into their bedroom, still furious, glaring at Michael as he got ready to lie down. You slapped me. You think that's the end? You will have to beat me tonight though, because I'm not letting you go that easy, Chichi said, screaming. Michael shook his head, his voice calm but firm. Chichi, don't push me tonight. I'm done with this madness. Meanwhile, the neighbors were outside whispering to each other. Now wow, now so marriage be, one of the women said to the other woman. I wonder how long they would last. Chichi is not yet pregnant, and this other girl is pregnant already. Who knows if Michael is responsible for her pregnancy? Or more, this life they somehow, Mama Chidema said. Meanwhile, Michael paced angrily in the room. He couldn't stop thinking about the arguments with Chichi. She stood across from him, still gripping his shirt. You slapped me, Michael. You think I will just forget that? You are going to pay for this, Chichi screamed, holding onto his shirt. Let go of me, Chichi. This needs to stop now. Don't force me to lose it, Michael said, his voice shaking with anger. Chichi's grip tightened, but Michael had enough. He pushed her hard and she fell backward onto the bed. You think you can just walk away? You are a coward. You are a coward, Michael, Chichi said. But Michael ignored her as he stormed out of the room, slamming the door. He went straight to the visitor's room, sitting on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by anger and frustration. The next morning, tension filled the house. Michael and Jumoke were about to leave for her university when the front door suddenly flew open. Mrs. Susan, Chichi's mother, stormed in furious.
Yo, where are
you? Mrs. Susan shouted. Michael turned, shocked to see her, and stepped forward to greet her. But before he could speak, she slapped him hard across the face. How dare you hit my daughter, Michael? Have you lost your mind? Mrs. Susan yelled. Staggering slightly, Michael held his cheek stunned. Jumoke stood by the door, her heart racing. Mrs. Susan, what are you talking about? Your daughter has been... Immediately, Chichi rushed out of the bedroom, grinning at the sight of her mother. Mama, he slapped me. That is how he treats me now because of this girl, Chichi said, smiling, standing next to her mother. So this is the girl trying to ruin my daughter's marriage. This is why my daughter is suffering, Mrs. Susan said, glancing at Jumoke with anger. Without warning, Mrs. Susan grabbed Jumoke by the hair, pulling her head back roughly. You think you can take my daughter's place? I will deal with you today, Mrs. Susan shouted, dragging Jumoke by the head. Please, I haven't done anything. Let go of me, please, Jumoke said, crying, trying to free herself. Enough! Get your hands off her, Michael yelled. Mrs. Susan stepped back, her eyes widened. Chichi was behind her, shocked by Michael's outburst. How dare you push my mother? I you crazy? Chichi screamed, but Michael turned to her coldly. Your mother has no right to touch Jumoke, just like you had no right to treat her badly in my house. Furious, Mrs. Susan slapped Michael again. How dare you insult me and my daughter? I raised her well. She's a good woman, Michael. Mrs. Susan yelled. Michael didn't flinch. He stared at her with cold eyes. I don't care how many times you slap me. You didn't raise your daughter right. She's a bad person and I regret marrying her. As for this marriage, it is over, Michael said calmly but firm. Mrs. Susan's eyes widened in shock. She raised her hand again, but Michael grabbed her wrist, holding it firmly. Mrs. Susan, I have respected you enough. Don't try it again, Michael said firmly. Jumoke, go to the car and lock the door. I'll be there in a minute, he said softly. Jumoke nodded, trembling as she rushed outside. Mrs. Susan tried to follow her, but Michael blocked her path. Stay there. If you or your daughter touch her again, you will regret it, Michael said angrily. Chichi, furious, rushed at Michael, but he stepped aside and pushed her back. She stumbled but quickly regained her balance. You can't kick me out of this house, Michael. I am not leaving, Chichi yelled. Michael didn't respond. He turned his back and walked toward the door. By the time I come back, you better be gone, Chichi. I am done with this useless marriage, Michael said without looking back. You can't just throw me out, Michael. This is my house too, Chichi shouted after him, but Michael didn't listen. He walked outside, slamming the door behind him. He got into the car where Jumoke sat quietly, her face paled with fear. I am sorry, sir. It is all my fault. It is my fault that your marriage is falling apart because of me, Jumoke said softly. No, don't say that, Jumoke. This was going to happen anyway, Michael said, shaking his head. He started the car, his voice calm but determined. We are going to my mother's house. We will stay there for a while. Jumoke nodded, tears welling up in her eyes as she whispered, Thank you, sir. After a long drive, they arrived at Michael's parents' house. His brother opened the door. His face paled when he saw Jumoke. Michael, I didn't expect you. Michael raised an eyebrow, noticing his brother's strange behavior. What is wrong with you? Why are you acting like this? Michael asked, feeling confused, but his brother quickly nodded and stepped aside to let them in. His eyes kept darting to Jumoke, filled with fear and guilt. Jumoke noticed and felt unease. Why is he staring at me like that? She whispered to herself. They entered, and soon Michael's mother appeared, smiling with joy when she saw her son. Michael, my son, it's been 5 years, oh. You are finally home. Thank goodness. Michael hugged his mother, feeling a sense of relief, but behind him, his brother kept staring at Jumoke, his hands shaking. Mama, it is so good to be back, Michael said, hugging his mother. Mrs. Gladys pulled back, looking at Jumoke standing behind Michael. She noticed and recognized her from social media. And who is this? I have seen you online but didn't believe the stories, Mrs. Gladys said, raising an eyebrow. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate you believing in me, Jumoke said nervously. Mrs. Gladys smiled. Don't mention. What is your name and why are you here? I'm Jumoke, ma'am. Mrs. Gladys nodded and turned to Michael. Michael, where is Chichi? What happened? Mrs. Gladys asked, concerned. Mama, I want to divorce her. She's been terrible. I can't stand her anymore, Michael said, frustrated. We'll talk about it later. For now, you need to rest first, Mrs. Gladys said calmly. Michael nodded, grateful. Mrs. Gladys turned to Joseph, who is still standing quietly in the corner. Joseph, show Jumoke to the guest room, she said gently. Yes, Mama. This way, Jumoke, Joseph said nervously. As they walked upstairs, Joseph kept glancing nervously at Jumoke. Do you know me, Jumoke? Joseph asked quietly. No, I don't think I've ever met you before. But why would I? She asked. Never mind. I thought you were someone else. Joseph signed. Jumoke wondered why he asked. Joseph opened the guest door and quickly avoided eye contact as he gestured for her to enter. Later that night, Michael sits on the edge of his mother's bed, looking tired but determined. Mrs. Gladys sat across from him, listening closely. Mama, Chichi did horrible things while I was away. She treated Jumoke terribly, even made her eat from the trash. I never imagined she could be so cruel, Michael said angrily. What? Chichi did that? Mrs. Gladys said in shock. I didn't want to believe it, but it is true. I had to bring Jumoke here. I can't live with Chichi anymore, Michael said bitterly. I'm so sorry, Michael, but Jumoke and you are safe here. No one will hurt her again, Mrs. Gladys said, shaking her head. Thank you, Mama. I needed to hear that, Michael said softly. I am always here for you, Michael. But what about Chichi's mother, Mrs. Susan? Mrs. Gladys asked. Yes, Mama. Mrs. Susan came to my house today and slapped me, accusing me of mistreating Chichi. She even attacked Jumoke, Michael said angrily. I can't believe it. She got no shame, Mrs. Gladys said as she sighed deeply. Then stands up. Michael, go get some water. I need to calm down, Mrs. Gladys said calmly. Michael leaves the room. As soon as he's gone, Mrs. Gladys grabbed her phone and sent a voice note. Mrs. Susan, you shameful woman. I took your daughter in, and this is how you repay me? Chichi's wickedness is from you, and don't think I will let it slide, Mrs. Gladys said furiously. She sent the message just as Michael returns with the water. As Michael walked back to his mother's room, he hears Joseph's voice coming from his room, speaking angrily on the phone. How is this girl I slept with now at Michael's house? I thought she was still with her parents, Joseph said furiously on the phone. What? Michael screamed as the glass slipped from his hand. Joseph hears the crash and look up, seeing Michael standing in the doorway. So it is you. You slept with Jumoke and got her pregnant. That is why you have been acting so weird, Michael yelled. I can explain, Michael, Joseph said, trembling. Just then, Mrs. Gladys and Jumoke rushed out, confused and scared. Tell Mama what you just said, Joseph. Tell her how you slept with Jumoke and betrayed me, Michael said, pointing at Joseph. Joseph, is this true? Mrs. Gladys asked in shock. No, this can't be true, Jumoke whispered to herself in disbelief. Yes, I did it, but the child isn't mine. It is Michael's child, Joseph said, crying on his knee. What are you talking about? How could the child be mine? Michael said angrily. At the party, I spiked her drink with sleeping pills. When she passed out, I used protection, but I took some of your sperm from the condom you used the last time you visited. I wanted to prove to you could get her pregnant, like your wife said you couldn't. I didn't expect her to be pregnant. Please forgive me, Joseph said, crying. Joseph, what have you done? Mrs. Gladys said, horrified. Jumoke collapsed, fainting from the shock. Jumoke! Oh my God! Mrs. Gladys screamed, rushing to her side. Michael stood frozen, unable to believe what he just heard, his world falling apart. When Jumoke collapsed, Mrs. Gladys and Michael rushed to her side. Panic filled the air as Mrs. Gladys quickly splashed water on her face. Jumoke, wake up, please. Jumoke, wake up, please, Mrs. Gladys said frantically. Don't do this, Jumoke, please, don't do this, Michael said, kneeling beside her. After a few moments, Jumoke's eyes fluttered open. She slowly sat up with their help, tears streaming down her face. Why is this happening to me? She said weakly. They helped her into a chair, but she shook with sob. Mrs. Gladys turned toward Joseph, who stood nearby looking guilty. Joseph, kneel down, she said angrily. Joseph immediately dropped to his knees, regret flooding his face. How could you do this? Betray your own brother and this poor girl, Mrs. Gladys said, furious. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I only wanted to help Michael, Joseph said, trembling. Help? You have ruined everything, Joseph. When you overheard Chichi and her friend, why didn't you tell me? Michael said, shouting. Joseph lowered his head, his voice breaking. I was scared, Michael. I didn't want to destroy your marriage. I thought if I helped, maybe things would get better, Joseph said, pleading. So you drugged Jumoke and violated her. That is your idea of helping, Michael yelled. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was devastated when I heard Chichi say you couldn't have children. I thought I could fix it. That is why I used your sperm. I am sorry, Michael. I didn't think it would end like this, Joseph said, crying. Sorry? You think sorry can fix this? You ruined my life, Joseph. My mother is dead because of this pregnancy, and my family hates me, Jumoke said, shouting through her tears. Tears poured down her eyes. How can I forgive you? My family sees me as a disgrace. You have no idea what you have done to me, Jumoke said, crying. Joseph looked at her, tearful and desperate. Jumoke, please. I am so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Please forgive me. I only wanted to help my brother, Joseph said, begging. Jumoke shook her head, standing up with anger in her eyes. Help! You have destroyed everything. This is betrayal, Joseph, Jumoke said, yelling. Michael turned to Joseph, suspicious in his voice. How did you even meet Jumoke? You are still in your final year. She's in her second year. Who introduced you to her? He said, demanding. Joseph wiped his face, regret in his eyes. It was at the birthday party. The host told me Jumoke was her sister's friend. That is how it all started. Jumoke's eyes widened in realization. Amaka's sister? Amaka invited me to that party, Jumoke said, shouting. Joseph nodded, confirming her worst fear. Yes, it is Amaka's sister, he said quietly. Jumoke's heart pounded. She stormed for the door. Take me back to the university now. I need to confront Amaka and her sister. They set me up, Jumoke shouted. Mr. Gladys rushed after her, trying to stop her. Jumoke, wait. You need to rest. You have been through so much. Go tomorrow. But Jumoke shook her head, crying, No, I can't wait. I trusted Amaka, and now I know she's involved. I need answers, she said, crying. Without another word, she left the house with Michael, following closely behind her. They arrived late at night. Jumoke didn't care about the stares from the students till awake. Her mind was focused on one thing, Amaka. Ignoring the whispers, she marched towards Amaka's hostel. Amaka looked up, surprised to see Jumoke. Jumoke, what are you doing here? Amaka said nervously. Jumoke didn't respond, her fury growing as she approached. You! How could you do this to me, Amaka? You set me up at your sister's party. You knew what Joseph did, didn't you? Jumoke shouted. Before Amaka could reply, Michael entered the room, standing behind Jumoke. Why did you hide what your sister did to me? You were my best friend, Amaka. How could you? Jumoke said, dragging Amaka outside. The students around them watched, whispered and recording the confrontation. Jumoke, what are you talking about? Amaka said, shaking. You knew what your sister and her friends did to me at the party. You said nothing. Nothing, Jumoke said, furious. Jumoke, I didn't, Amaka said nervously. Don't act like you don't know. You protected her, not me. You were there and said nothing. You betrayed me, Amaka, Jumoke interrupted. Amaka's face turned pale as the weight of Jumoke's word hit her. The students around them watched in silence, recording every moment. Jumoke, I didn't know what to do. I was trying to protect my sister. I didn't want her to go to jail. I didn't mean to hurt you. That is why I said we should stop being friends, Amaka said, crying. Wow, so that is it. You protected her, but what about me? What about your best friend? Jumoke said, shocked. Her voice broke as tears filled her eyes. Sorry can't bring back my mother, Amaka. Sorry can't fix my broken family, Jumoke said, screaming. Amaka froze, sobbing uncontrollable. The students continued recording, captivated by the drama unfolding before them. I am sorry, Jumoke. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please forgive me, Amaka said, falling to her knees. Forgive you? You let your sister ruin my life. How can I forgive you? Jumoke said. Amaka couldn't answer, her sob overwhelming her. The crowd stood in silence, watching the pain unfold. I trusted you, Amaka, but you lied to me. You betrayed me. Nothing will ever be the same, Jumoke said, tears streaming down her eyes. Jumoke turned and walked away, her heart heavy with grief. The crowd parted as she passed, their eyes on her. You need to do the right thing, Amaka. Stop protecting your sister at the cost of someone else's life, Michael said calmly to Amaka. With that, Michael followed Jumoke. Amaka remained on the ground, crying as the students slowly began to despair, their phone buzzing with new videos. Outside, Michael sat beside Jumoke in the car, trying to comfort her. It is over, Michael said softly. How could she do this to me? I thought she was my friend, Jumoke said between her tears. People do terrible things when they are scared, Michael said softly, trying to comfort her. But you know what, Jumoke? You did the right thing by confronting her. He handed her a tissue, watching as she wiped her tears away. After a few moments of silence, he started the car and pulled out of the school parking lot. Let's get out of here, he said gently. There is a restaurant nearby. We can sit down and you can calm down, okay? Michael said. Jumoke nodded, still sniffing, as they drove off. She stared out the window, her mind replaying the confrontation over and over again. Her heart felt shattered, but there was a small sense of relief that she had finally spoken the truth. They reached the restaurant and Michael parked the car. He opened the car for her, guiding her inside, where the comforting warmth of the place contrasted with the coldness of her emotions. Take a seat, he said, pulling out a chair for her. I'll get you something to drink. Jumoke sat down, her eyes still red and swollen from crying. She felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. As Michael walked away to order, she rested her head in her hands, taking deep shaking breaths. The weight of everything that had happened passed down on her. But for now, in the quiet rooms of the restaurant, she let herself breathe. As night fell, Michael and Jumoke drove through the quiet streets, both lost in their thoughts. After the tense conversation earlier, it was too late to return to Mrs. Gladys' house, so Michael decided to check into a nearby hotel. He booked 2 separate rooms, giving Jumoke the space she needed to process everything that had happened. Once inside their room, Jumoke shut herself in hers. Heavy with sorrow, Michael lay awake in his room, staring at the ceiling, troubled by the betrayal from his brother Joseph. He couldn't understand how Joseph could hurt both him and Jumoke like that. The next morning, they drove back to Mrs. Gladys' house. Jumoke went straight to her room and closed the door behind her. Michael watched her, his heart aching for her. He wished there was more he could do. Mrs. Gladys walked over to him, noticing his concern. Michael, can we talk outside? Mrs. Gladys said. Michael nodded and followed her outside to her car. Once inside, the atmosphere was tense. As Mrs. Gladys turned to face him, her expression serious. Is it true you are impotent, Michael? Because now that Joseph says Jumoke's pregnancy is yours, we need to talk about this, Mrs. Gladys said. Michael shook his head in disbelief. No, that can't be true. I am not impotent, he said. Then Why is Chichi telling people that? How did Joseph even hear about it? And why are you using condoms with your wife? Mrs. Gladys said, raising an eyebrow. Michael was frustrated, trying to explain himself. I don't know why Chichi would say that. The reason I use protection is because Chichi insisted on it. She said she had an infection and didn't want me to get it, Michael said. Mrs. Gladys softened a bit but remained skeptical. How do you know she's telling the truth? Have you seen proof? Mrs. Gladys said. Yes, Chichi showed me the test results from the hospital, Michael said, nodding. Do you know where she went for the tests? Mrs. Gladys asked. Yes, the doctor is our private doctor, Michael replied. Well, you should go to the hospital and confirm what she told you. Talk to the doctor. Chichi might be hiding something. Why would she say you can't have children? Something doesn't add up, Mrs. Gladys said. Michael thought about it. It made sense to verify Chichi's story. You are right, Mom. I will visit the doctor tomorrow. Please, just make sure Jumoke is okay. She's really stressed out, Michael said. I will, my son, Mrs. Gladys said. Her expression became serious again. Michael, you need to handle this carefully. You're married to Chichi and Jumoke's future depends on it, Mrs. Gladys said. I will, Mom. I promise, Michael said, nodding firmly. The following morning, Michael woke up early, determined to find the truth. After a long drive, he arrived at the hospital, his heart racing with anxiety. He went straight to Dr. Paul's office, hoping there wouldn't be any patients around. Michael, long time no see. I tried calling you, but your number was unreachable. Your wife mentioned you went to London for the year, Dr. Paul said, smiling as he opened the door for Michael. Michael was taken aback by Chichi's lie. He checked his phone and realized he had blocked the doctor's number. He was shocked. He put the phone away and forced a smile. Yes, I just got back from a short trip to London. My phone got damaged while I was there. Oh, I see. So how is Chichi? She's fine, thank you, Michael replied him. A pause followed as Michael gathered his courage. Dr. Paul, I have a question. Is it possible for a woman to get pregnant if someone took sperm from a condom and injects it into another woman? Michael asked. Technically, yes, if the woman is fertile, but it is not a common method and there are many factors to consider. Why do you ask? Dr. Paul responded. And does Chichi have any infection? Because she told me she has one, which is why she insisted I use condom. Michael replied, no, Chichi is perfectly fine, but she did some scan and Dr. Paul hesitated before continuing. She doesn't have a womb anymore due to multiple abortions. He said, what? How is it possible? She showed me test results saying she had an infection. Michael said, shocked. I am not aware of those results because the infection test we ran shows she's fine. But here is the scan results I am talking about. She told me not to tell you anything and even bribed me. That is why I have been trying to reach you, because I felt guilty, Dr. Paul said. Michael's eyes widened as he took the papers. Why would she lie to me and tell people I am impotent? Michael said. I don't know, Michael, but it seems Chichi has been hiding something, Dr. Paul replied. Thank you, doctor. I will take my leave now. As Michael walked out of the hospital, his anger and confusion boiled over. Michael drove down the highway, his anger burning inside him. Dr. Paul's word kept echoing in his mind. She doesn't have a womb anymore due to multiple abortions. His hands gripped the steering wheel as betrayal and disbelief gunned at him. How could Chichi lie to him for 10 good years? His foot pressed harder on the accelerator as he sped down the road. He needed answers. He needed to confront her, but before he could think straight, he picked up his phone and dialed his mother. Mom, it is Michael. Michael, what is wrong? Are you okay? Mrs. Gladys said. Michael's voice trembled with anger. Mom, I just came from the hospital. Dr. Paul told me that Chichi doesn't have a womb. She's been lying to me all this time. She made me believe she had an infection and told me we had to use condoms. But she's been hiding the truth. She's barren, Mom, Michael said. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mrs. Gladys was shocked. What? She doesn't have a womb? Are you sure about this, Michael? Mrs. Gladys said. Yes, Mom. The doctor showed me the results. She's been lying to me and worse. She told her friends that I am impotent. How could she do this to me? Michael said. Mrs. Gladys struggled to remain calm. Michael, listen to me. I know you are angry, but don't make any rash decision. This is a lot to process, Mrs. Gladys said. How can I calm down, Mom? I've loved this woman. I trusted her. She's been lying to me for years. How could she do this? Michael said, his voice shaking. Mrs. Gladys understood the hurt in her son's voice and tried to calm him. I know you are hurt, but please, take a deep breath. We will figure this out together. Michael let out a sharp breath, trying to steady himself. I gave her everything, Mom, and this is how she repays me, Michael said. I know, Michael. Just take a deep breath. We will get through this together, Mrs. Gladys said softly. Michael's anger flared again. I will call you back, Mom. I need to handle this. Without waiting for a response, he hung up and parked the car. His mind was racing as he stormed inside the house. As soon as he entered the living room, he saw Chichi and her mother, Mrs. Susan, sitting on the couch talking. The moment Chichi saw Michael, her face twisted in anger. Oh, you are back. What are you doing here, Michael? Are you done babysitting Jumoke? Why don't you just stay with her? Chichi said. Michael's fury boiled over. Chichi, shut up your mouth. Chichi stood up, her voice rising. How dare you report me to your mother like a child? What kind of a man goes running to his mother with his problems? Chichi said. Michael's voice thundered in response. Don't ever mention my mother again, you barren woman. Mrs. Susan, who had been silent up to this moment, stood up shocked. What did you call my daughter? How dare you? Before she could finish, Michael threw the scan result onto Mrs. Susan's lap. There is it. That is what your precious stupid daughter has been hiding from me. She doesn't have a womb. She has been lying to me for years, telling me she had an infection, and now she's telling people I am impotent. I trusted her with my life, and this is what I get, Michael said. Mrs. Susan stared at the results, stunned. Chichi, however, wasn't finished. It is a lie. This is all part of your plan to divorce me and run off with Jumoke. I won't let you do this, Chichi said, screaming. Michael laughed bitterly, shaking his head. A plan? Chichi, I loved you. I gave you everything you wanted, and this is how you repay me, by lying about me and hiding the fact that you can't have children. How could you betray me like this? Michael said. Chichi's voice trembled. I didn't betray you. You are trying to ruin me because of that Jumoke, Chichi said. Oh, really? Michael replied. Yes, really, Chichi responded. Michael stepped closer, his voice cold. Joseph overheard you, Chichi. He heard you telling your friends that I am impotent. After everything, this is what you do, Michael said. I didn't say that, Chichi replied. You betrayed me, Chichi. Chichi's face crumbled, but before she could respond, Michael's voice grew colder. Start packing your things and leave my house. Jumoke is carrying my child. The baby she's carrying is mine, and all thanks to Joseph for making it possible. Chichi's eyes widened, her voice flattering. What? What did you just say? You heard me right. The child Jumoke is carrying is mine. Thanks to my brother, he saved me from your lies, Michael replied. This can't be true. Chichi said. I regret ever giving you my last name, Michael replied. How can Jumoke be carrying your child? Chichi asked. Without answering, Michael turned and walked out of the house, leaving Chichi and Mrs. Susan speechless. The truth had shattered everything they thought they knew. Mrs. Susan, her hands shaking, let out a scream. Hey! Emechala mo! Ndi room na roru. Oh, Chichi, why? Jesus, oh, I am finished. My enemy is at work. Chichi, why? Jesus, help me, Mrs. Susan said. Mrs. Susan's breath was heavy and her chest rose and fell as she stared at her daughter in disbelief. She couldn't fully grasp what had just happened. Her mind raced as a deep sense of betrayal filled her. Her eyes locked onto Chichi, who sat slumped in a chair, her face twisted with bitterness. Chichi, what have you done to yourself? How could you hide such a secret from your husband? From me, your mother? Multiple abortions? All these years, you have been lying that Michael is the cause of your childlessness. Ha! Chichi, you are wicked though, Mrs. Susan said. Chichi clenched her fists, her lips coiling into a snare. She was done listening to her mother's accusation and blame. Her world was falling apart and she felt trapped. And what exactly do you want from me, Mama? Do you think I owe anyone any explanation? I did what I had to do. Don't sit there acting all righteous. You never cared about me. All you ever cared about was pushing me to marry a rich man like Michael. Now that things are falling apart, you suddenly wanted to act like you care, Chichi said. Mrs. Susan's eyes widened, shocked and hurt by her daughter's word. How dare you speak to me like that, Chichi? I'm your mother. Everything I ever did was for your future. I wanted the best for you, and this is how you repay me, by lying to me, to your husband, by destroying the marriage I helped you build. You have brought shame on this family, Chichi, Mrs. Susan said. Chichi stood up suddenly, knocking over the chair. Her face was filled with rage, and though tears welled up in her eyes, they didn't fall. Shame? You think I care about shame, Mama? You never cared about me. All you cared about was money, status, and appearance. I did what I had to do to survive. You pushed me into this marriage, and you made me live a lie, Chichi said. I pushed you? Stop lying to yourself, Chichi. You wanted this life. You wanted the comfort and wealth. I only supported you because you made your decision. And now, look at what you have done. You destroyed everything, Mrs. Susan responded. Chichi threw her hands up, pacing the room like a trapped animal. Destroyed what? Michael was already weak. He never even tried to understand me. And now, Jumoke, you think I care about that child she's carrying? Let them have each other, but I will make them pay, Chichi said. Mrs. Susan's voice cracked with desperation. Chichi, listen to yourself. You are throwing everything away. Is this how you want to end up? Without a family, without a future, all because of your pride, Mrs. Susan said. Chichi's voice dropped, full of venom. What future, Mama? I lost everything the moment I married Michael. It was never love. It was always transaction. And now, I am done pretending. You cost everything, Mama. But as for Jumoke and Michael, they will not go unpunished. I swear, I will deal with them, especially Jumoke. What do you think Chichi planned to do? And do you think what Joseph did to Jumoke was right? As for Amaka, do you think she would do the right thing by calling her sister out? And what will be Jumoke's fate? We'll find out in the next chapter. Thank you so much for watching this video up until now. And I would like to know the lesson you've learned so far and your thoughts about this story in the comment section. If you love this story, please share to your family and loved ones. See you in the next chapter. Have a blessed day.